Welcome to Inspiring Perspectives, a podcast by Think Parallax featuring fresh takes and bold ideas for the real-world sustainability challenges and solutions at some of the world's most respected brands and companies. I'm your host, Derek Sabori, and this is what sustainability sounds like today. All right. So I'm going to dive in, and I'm just going to say, Kristine, welcome to Inspiring Perspectives. Thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Derek. I'm excited for our conversation.
I'm excited as well because Kristine Richmond, you are the Senior Director of ESG and Sustainability Impact at WM. Not Waste Management, but WM, right? You told me before the show that you've officially kind of changed that up and dropped the waste management part. Tell me a little bit about that before we dive in.
Yes. So as a company, we rebranded 2 years ago to Drop the Waste. We do so much more for waste for our customers, and really wanted to bring forefront our brand promise, which is always working for a sustainable tomorrow. Material management and waste management is a big piece of that, but we do tons of other things as well, which hopefully I'll get to share a little bit of that through our time together today.
Yeah, we're going to talk about it all. First of all, though, where are you dialing in from?
I am right now in Winter Garden, Florida. It is sunny and 70 outside. Hopefully, many people are starting to enjoy spring weather when you're listening to this podcast, but it's a good time of year to be in Florida.
Yeah, I bet. Well, enjoy your time out there. Let's dive in, though, and you tell me, if you could, just about that role that I mentioned, the responsibilities that you have, sort of a day in the life. You've got a fascinating path to how you got into that role as well, but I want to expand on that, but maybe tell me a little bit about the role. What does that entail there for you at WM?
Yeah, to start with what my role is within the company, like I mentioned, sustainability is a core of who we are. And so there are teams that are really focused on what do we do to support our customers' goals around sustainability? What are we doing around sustainable solutions like recycling and renewable energy and organics solutions? And then I am helping to lead and think about as us as a company and as a $20 billion company, what are we doing about sustainability? How are we embedding it? How are we operationalizing sustainability in our own operations? And then what are our goals and strategies? So setting our 2030 targets, our long-term climate and social impact targets, and then also communicating and reporting that out really credibly to external stakeholders, from our investors, customers, but also our employees. Our employees are really interested in what we're doing as a company. Been very fortunate to be at WM, part of the sustainability team for the last 2 years, but I've been working internal to companies on sustainability for the last 15 plus. We'll just leave the plus there. And it's been really interesting to see the evolution of this function and practice. You know, I think back to my early days at Coca-Cola, being part of a really large global team, thinking about how we operationalize sustainability throughout a global supply chain and business footprint. I've also got to work with some other global brands like Ocean Spray and Olive Garden, thinking about building first sustainability programs and really then expanding into this true ESG world where the environmental, social, and the governance of how a company thinks about sustainability is coming together. So it's been a really interesting ride. I came to it pretty uniquely. I have a background in fine arts with a photography degree, and then had the opportunity to lead a Starbucks and an Apple retail store back in the day. And it was really interesting to see two companies, big brands, thinking about environmental and sustainability issues differently at the time. Both companies have had great evolutions in their own journey of sustainability, as most companies have. But then I very purposely went back to grad school and went and got a master's at Duke to earn a seat at the table to make the business case for sustainability and how to be proactive. And we definitely have to think about it from a risk standpoint, but also how do you build the business case to take action before there is a crisis? And so that's a lot of what I do now. I get to talk with our senior leaders and business executives on a daily basis of how are we embedding sustainability throughout the organization. A lot of that is around data and metrics and reporting on performance. I mean, it's the old adage, what gets measured gets managed. So we're always trying to put more numbers behind it. But it's also really around how are you facilitating change? At the end of the day, we're all people. So how are we working together and understanding each other's perspective and what their needs are and what the business needs over the long-term strategy? And then what are expectations we hear from? I spent a lot of time talking with investors, also with customers, and then listening to what employees think about sustainability as well. So that's kind of a little bit of my day-to-day, talking a lot, talking more than I ever thought I would, and then spending time with data and spreadsheets, making the data come off the page.
Okay, so you talked about a few things that I want to extract in there and dive deeper on. You talked about taking action, kind of before you need to, getting that data, that stakeholder engagement, the ability to work across the board, across the company. How has your path, though, working on the retail side with these great brands, working in-house, kind of having a background in the arts, how has that all influenced how you tackle your role today?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it wasn't planned, but I think it was really great that I started with uh, an art degree or thinking about photography. It's a lot of critical thinking. So now a lot of what I do is take in information and data and think about how can I present this in a compelling way. A lot of communication, a lot of interacting with concepts or ideas that our business leaders may not be used to thinking about, and helping them look to where does this track and align with your own business priorities. It can be something as simple as trying to be creative. How are we going to talk about straws and what's the right thing to do around plastic straws for a restaurant company, to also thinking about, when I was at Ocean Spray, it's a grower-owned cooperative. The growers own their own business and then own this amazing global brand. How are you helping them understand how water connects to the brand and reputational value of Ocean Spray? It's also important for their operations as a grower, for their own family farms. And so it's really trying to find a way to connect those two things together.
Yeah, so important. Kind of the heart of our conversation today is this idea of, less, as important as reporting is, you've talked about that, as accounting is measuring, what you're doing. You have this idea, though, that we need to focus less on all of that and focus more on action. It's the decade of action, as we call it, up to 2030, which now is less than a decade, right? It's already upon us, and kind of what to do with all that data, making the most out of it. So why is that something that's so important to you? And why is that sort of your battle cry, if you will, to say, hey, we get it, that's important, but we need more action? What does that mean to you? What does action look like? Where do we go?
Yeah, Derek, it's a good question. And I do think that as a sustainability profession, we're at this pivotal moment when we're getting a lot more pressure externally. I mean, literally within a week of the recording of this, we're expecting to see the SEC Commission vote on the proposed climate disclosure rule. That can have some ramifications of what companies are doing around climate accounting and reporting for many years to come. And I think it's really important as practitioners that we step back, and we're feeling the pressure and the requirement externally to report more. But I think it's just as important that we make sure we're finding a way to use that data internally to drive action and inform the right decisions. And so that can sometimes be a misstep where sustainability teams can get really focused on what are we reporting and putting externally. Make sure you're taking a pause and thinking, well, where can I put this internally? Is there a dashboard or a scorecard or a report out business strategy meeting that I can put that data point into and integrate it so it's being looked at cohesively? I think for the next decade, as you say, as you kind of mentioned, this is an idea that was prevalent when I was in New York last September for Climate Week. It's really good that we continue to have evolution and improvements around accounting and impact accounting, both on the environmental and social side. the environmental and climate side, but also on the social side. But I think it's really upon us to make sure it's a decade of action as well, that accounting and those standards and the requirements are ultimately helping us to make the right decisions for our companies over the long term. So it's a phrase that I heard someone say during Climate Week, and I think I've really kept it foremost in my mind of how are we going to make sure it's a decade of action and not a decade of accounting? Because we don't need more reports. We don't need more data, really. We really need to make sure those data is translating to action.
So you guys have a strong kind of messaging platform, a great sustainability communication, strategy on your website. You've got a great report. We've helped with that report, full disclosure. But how do you give me a sense of what that means to you? How are you kind of taking action? What are you doing in your role? What are some examples you might be doing at WM to kind of put that into play? Or is it harder than it seems? It's easier said than done. Do you have some specific examples of how you're turning that data and those reporting elements into action over there at WM?
Yeah, I definitely can. And it is harder than it sounds, right? A lot of sustainability reporting traditionally is backward looking. It's more of we look in the last year and we're rolling that up and then presenting it externally. And always appreciate TPX's support around our reporting. But I will say WM has over a decade history of having leading sustainability disclosures, having our first report come out back in 2010. That's a long history and legacy of being committed to transparency and reporting before a lot of companies were doing it.
That's
very
right.
proud of it. There's a big team behind it, the big team supporting all of that work. And I think what we've really done in the last 2 years is try to find ways that we look at this on an annual basis and are reporting it out from a accountability and building credibility in the marketplace with investors and customers. Well, what are some of those KPIs that we could start to integrate for internal reporting? One example that we publicly share and is known is that we now have a quarterly report to our board. So they're getting a sustainability scorecard. They're getting an update on some of those key measures we look at towards our 2030 goals. And it just keeps it top of mind, right? And so we're able to give them both the quantitative update, here's the data, and here's this metric of how we're doing. And then we also give them an update, how's that relating to the business? So a great example of that for our circularity goal, it's very closely connected to all of the investments we're making around our recycling facilities. And so the board is used to hearing, okay, how are we doing on building out that network? How's it performing from a revenue standpoint and cost? This is helping them bring in that impact metric of tons recovered as well. And then that is just a really great example of it. It makes sense. You want to make sure that you're reporting on what is the benefit of these investments we're making. And it's a similar approach when we look at like our renewable investments as well. We as a company are investing $2.9 billion in sustainable solutions through 2026 related to recycling and renewable energy. And part of what my team does is also keep on the radar, well, how does that translate to tons recovered? Material that's then available for reuse. How is that translating to the amount of renewable energy that we're able to generate from landfill gas as a renewable source? And so it really helps to build out that holistic story. So that's a real live case, an example. I think another area of opportunity that as more data comes available in climate accounting, it'd be great to make sure you're looking at places to include that around your capital planning and also looking at it of how, how's a company investing the capital and then how's it tying back to emissions reductions.
So looking back at what you just said, is it fair to say getting leadership involved, kind of integrating it into the business, tying it to the business, finding those proof points and kind of continuously acting on them Is that a kind of a good summary? Anything, did I miss anything in there in terms of what it takes to kind of
Yeah,
turn
no,
this into action?
I think that's a good summary, Derek. And I think, one thing I'm always trying to keep an eye on is how can I not recreate the wheel? So how can I get a KPI into another business process that might already exist or a dashboard that might already exist? So instead of it being separate, instead of it being like, okay, here's the sustainability component of it, how do you put that in place with another business process that's already in place? And the way to do that is to make sure that you're finding your allies within those business functions. People, it's always important, I think, at the end of the day, to find people who are passionate about sustainability. That's not a hard thing to do in this day and age. A lot of people want to work in sustainability, and I always remind people you don't have to have it in your title to be able to work on it. You can just be personally passionate about it or interested. And what I'm always trying to find is, okay, what's their need and like, what are they trying to accomplish? Or maybe if they have a challenge, is there something I can bring to the table to help them with that, to help them make the full business case of why we would or would not do something when we're making decisions.
Yeah, that's a great one. I find that a lot in all the conversations I have. It's that how do we see sustainability from that person's perspective or from that department's perspective, right? You may go into it thinking one thing, somebody else might say, hey, from the work that I'm doing, here's what we're really focused on or what we need. And a lot of times what's interesting as well, they might be resistant to something, but it's not because they're not, to your point, passionate about it. It's just because it might not align with either their capabilities or what's required of them, what their expectations are, et cetera. So just being able to navigate that whole space is really important, right?
Yeah. Early on in my career, I had an engineer say to me, always remember everyone's favorite radio station is WIFM. And that stands for what's in it for me. And it's very true, right? Like at all levels, if you can help listen and hear what their challenges are and then help them meet or solve that challenge and find alignment with your own objectives or the own way you're thinking about sustainability, you're going to get them to tune in a lot faster.
I love that. That's great. And I mean, the last thing we need is another acronym. So I like the idea of turning that acronym into a radio station. So that's easy to remember. So that's a good one. You've given us some ideas in terms of what it's going to take, what's been effective for you. What are some of the challenges though you have faced or encountered when trying to really take action and trying to go above and beyond just good data and good reporting? Any challenges that you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges that we're facing as a tribe in the sustainability world and as practitioners is prioritization. We can't do it all. And I often think for every time I decide to do one thing, I'm de facto deciding not to do 10 other things and making sure that that's the right balance. It's a good place to be, to have so many, priorities and good ideas of things that we could move forward and how we could get it done. But I think that is one of the biggest challenges is just trying to think about sequencing and also when's the right time. One of the biggest things that I've had to learn in my career now working in corporate sustainability for 15 years, and I'll be frank, you hear no a lot, as I'm sure everyone does in the business world, is timing is everything, right? And so I've tuned my ear that when I hear no, I don't really hear no. I hear no, not right now.
Mm,
And I just kind of put a pin in it and kind of wait for additional conditions or timing or resources to line up to be able to take action on that. And there's no lack of things for us to do in the sustainability space. So I think patience is always really helpful. We truly are playing the long game. It is a marathon, not a sprint. And so, making sure and just framing it in my own mind of even if I'm not getting buy-in today, I really do trust that the circle will turn and it'll come back around at another time.
Kristine, you've been doing this for so long, as you said, and you've seen, I would imagine, having worked for so many great companies, great organizations, been in this role now. How have you seen it evolve? Has it changed since your earliest days? What's different now than 15 years ago?
Yeah, Derek, I appreciate that. But as you're talking, it made me start to feel a little old, and I don't feel that old every day. I wake up very invigorated with plenty of things to do. One of the biggest things that I think I've seen a huge shift, even in the last 2 or 3 years, is around sustainability. And there's plenty of companies that are still trying to answer the question, why are we doing this? But I do feel like as a profession and as practitioners, we're getting into the more of the space of the how. So I think back to my early days, so much of what I was working on was just really that first step, building the business case. Why are we doing it? Why would we do these particular initiatives? To now, I do feel like a lot more of it is like, okay, like how do we do it? And how do we do it effectively and efficiently and really helping to support long-term success? I also think as a profession, it's good for us to remind ourselves sustainability really does have three components: environmental, social, and economical. And so I think more and more linking those three together, seen a huge evolution where sustainability isn't just the E or the environmental piece. It truly is starting to connect to the social. And then it is on us as practitioners to make sure we're connecting to the financial as well. It doesn't do anybody any good to have a company that's implementing programs that aren't going to be truly sustainable. It's not helpful from a social standpoint, and it's definitely not helpful from an environmental standpoint either.
Yeah. What do you think the future is of your role? Are roles like yours, are they expanding? Do we need more sustainability? I really I'm aligned with you 100%. When people are excited about sustainability, they may not need to have a quote unquote sustainability job to play a part in your sustainability program. But the role of the head of ESG or the head of sustainability or departments, just all of this, what do you kind of think the future looks like in the next 5 years in this space? Do you think we'll be pulling back, or is it full steam ahead and there's no turning back? Will it evolve and change? Give me some perspective there.
Well, I would like to be able to have a DeLorean to time travel and know for certain. So I'll just go. I'll just go out on a limb. I do think that teams will continue to expand and grow, specific to the sustainability functions, but I think that's going to be fairly limited. And I really hope that companies do that very judiciously. I don't think we want to grow too big too fast. I do think it's good to do incremental year-over-year change, but also look for other efficiencies. One thing that is the Wild West kind of in this space right now are digital enablement tools, and AI is a big conversation around how can we potentially leverage that. And I don't know the answer to that yet. So that might be part of this equation of how teams look and what the people aspect of it looks. But the number one thing I will tell you, AI can only do so much on the data side. When you're talking about action, when you're talking about change management, you're really talking about people. And that takes resources. That takes people understanding what the objective is, understanding the strategy, and then really helping to be that connective tissue across other functions so that we all can be moving in the same place. So we're always going to need to have some human powered. It just might be AI human power. And I'm okay with that, right? Because the more data and insights I have, the more change I can affect within an organization. But you started off by talking about not everyone needs sustainability in their title. I'm a huge proponent of that. I actually don't think that sustainability teams should grow exponentially. I think the power is much more, how do we start to embed this to be part of everyone's job? And it's not even that you have sustainability in the title, it just becomes part of the culture. That is something at WM has been really exciting to see come to the forefront of it's part of our brand. Everyone feels and understands and feels like they're part of us bringing sustainability solutions to our communities. And so it's really exciting to have that be a shared value that we have across the organization. And I hope I see more of that in other companies. It's much more effective to have this value and this way of thinking embedded into other functions than it to be a department that's kind of insulary. But the reality is there's an avalanche of reporting that's coming towards us, and it's moving more and more into the compliance space, into regulatory requirements, and that's going to take some manpower. And I'll just counsel, let's be balanced of how much we're spending on the auditing and due diligence of the data with how much we're also investing in the actions we're driving with that data as well.
I want to go back to what you said about, creating that culture, having that as a value, bringing your humans along, right? What do you think it took? What does it take for companies to bring their employees along on the ride, especially if they're keeping a sustainability department small? What's been effective for you in really building out that culture? And as you said, really starting to bake it in so that everybody's working on it and moving forward together. Any thoughts or advice you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing is making it as approachable as possible. I mean, we could do a whole podcast if you'd like with acronyms and technical terms related to climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. And there's plenty of acronyms out there, right? But I think what I always try to do is figure out how can we make this very approachable. So a real world example of that at WM right now is we have 2030 goals that are very specific, very data and measurement driven, and we're reporting progress against those every year. We set them in 2022, and this will be the second year we're reporting progress when we release the report this year. But part of that is we looked at, well, what are we really trying to accomplish with these goals and with these KPIs? And that's how we as a company came up with our ambitions. And so WM Sustainability Ambitions and what that means to us when we say we're always working for a sustainable tomorrow are 9 simple words. Material is repurposed, energy is renewable, and communities are thriving. And when we talk about communities, it's both our employees and our workforce along with the communities we serve with our services. And so that is something that's really helpful to make it very approachable across a broad set of audiences. You don't need to know what a GHG is. You don't need to know what SBTI is or TRIR is from a safety goal standpoint. Those 9 simple words make it very approachable. Okay, I got it. This is what we really mean by sustainability. And this is how we are helping to have a more sustainable tomorrow.
I like that. Making it approachable, super, super helpful. Good reminder. If you could, we have this sort of magic wand approach that we take. And if you could wave this magic wand and make kind of everything just go, boom, there we go. I did it. We did it. We're moving forward in the right way with what I've been working on all along. How would things become in terms of kind of corporate sustainability? What would it all look like if we could just make it all happen over the weekend?
Oh, Derek, that's a big question. And
we can't cover that in 30 seconds.
Even with a magic wand, I'd probably still take 30 days and not just a weekend. I think it's helpful to think this way to see what could be the most impactful, but I also acknowledge that it's helpful to give people time to process the change, right? So when you say that, I'm literally imagining tomorrow, every employee at WM knows like those 9 words and our ambitions. But they also need a little bit of time to see it coming to life and to see what are we actually doing about that and what actions we're taking for them to truly believe, right? I think if I could, as a practitioner, wave a magic wand, I think tomorrow what I would have is an ability to quantify the financial impacts of all of the environmental and social KPIs that we're measuring. That is, I think, one of the biggest opportunities we have. If I could equate everything we're looking at and an ESG back to a financial metric tomorrow, I would get a lot of attention, internal and external to a company. There are ways to do that, and there are evolving methodologies, but it does take some time. And then you kind of have to buy into that methodology as well. But that is a little bit of where we're moving our own reporting and data analysis. Is how do we help understand the financial implications of it?
Yeah, and it's almost, yeah, I think kind of putting a dollar amount on those impacts, a little bit of natural capital accounting, perhaps. In one of my former roles, I worked with Caring, and they do an environmental profit and loss where they put a dollar amount to their impacts across emissions, pollution, land use, et cetera. It's a lot of data modeling because it's very hard to have all of that information in your supply chain, but it's something unique when you come out and you see a dollar amount attached to that. And it either shows you the risk that is there for your organization, the opportunities that are there. So I hear you on that. Go ahead. You want to add on to that?
Yeah, Derek, if I could just add on for a second, I would also say what you're just talking about, and I was saying there's methodologies to do it, but there's not buy-in and belief in it, right? And so that's why it would be great to have as a magic wand. But again, you've got to give time for people to believe in it and have some credibility within those metrics as well.
Yeah, and to your point, that's sort of a long game, right? That takes more than happening over the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
This is the time of the show where I ask you for some advice, some takeaways. If you kind of had to boil all this down and somebody was said, hey, what advice do you have for me? I'm just starting in this role or in this space, or we're an organization that is just, diving into our journey. What do you want people to know? Give us some takeaways and advice for anybody that might be looking to do the work that you're doing over at WM.
Yeah, one of the biggest things I would reinforce, we've already touched base on it, is you don't have to have sustainability in your title to be part of the sustainability tribe. Some of the most impressive work that I've accomplished over the years is just somebody reaching out from like supply chain or finance and saying like, I'm really interested in this, or I read this article, or I want to know more about climate change and what we as a company are doing around that. Help me understand more about it. And then there's this magic that happens that they learn a little bit more and they figure out how to integrate that into what they're doing and what their role is. There's huge opportunities in that. And I think that is one of the most impactful change agents we can have within an organization. So that's one piece, right? You don't need sustainability in your title. If you're passionate about it, learn and just start doing. Don't worry about it being perfect, progress over perfection. Then the second thing, I'll give some counsel to my tribe, sustainability practitioners that are working on this. I would really encourage you to help us as a tribe get past this either or kind of black and white, all or nothing. I call it or thinking. It has to be this or it has to be this, right? I think a lot of what we have to do as practitioners is help both stakeholders who are really passionate about environmental and social issues, along with also our business leaders, understand that it's an and. How can you find the solution that helps both pieces move forward together? And so I'm always saying, like, how do we get to that and conversation, that we're able to do this and we're also able to accomplish a sustainability goal? So that would be my advice. Like, I literally write on a Post-it and so it helps me with my thinking so I can always be looking for a win-win situation. It sounds kind of cheesy, but they do exist. And that's when you're able to get change to happen more rapidly.
Yeah. And that is that old kind of going back to improv training or how to facilitate conversations or negotiation. It doesn't always have to be a zero-sum game. It's a yes and to keep things moving along. I see your point, and I would like to add this. So I think that's great. And those are good things to keep in mind. Kristine, where do you go for your resources and inspiration? How do you stay motivated? How do you stay informed? Do you have any good resources for us to share in terms of where you get your sustainability insights?
I do find a lot of value looking at different sustainability newsletters. I mean, not planning to plug, but I'll plug the New York Stock Exchange does an ESG newsletter every Friday. It's less than a 5-minute read. They have very topical topics for internal practitioners that are extremely helpful. I think the other thing is just pay attention also to the business headlines. A lot of what I do is make sure and stay on some news aggregators so I can see what are the topics that are going to be on the top of minds for my business leaders and for my executives. In case there is, every once in a while, there's something on there around climate change or maybe some diversity or other social challenges that we're facing as a society. So I just like to kind of know what's on the front page of, different news outlets. And then I would say also, lastly, don't underestimate spending time, unscripted coffee dates, even virtually, with your internal business leaders. Ask them what they're listening to and what they're cueing into, because then that can help you know what frame of mind they're coming from. So maybe one very specific, one a little broader, and then maybe a suggestion of how to expand what your resources are that are most applicable for your own position.
Yeah, those are all great. And as people start to go out on that journey and start to familiarize themselves with the headlines, with the topics, is there a particular topic that you would push people into to say, hey, really keep an eye on this one or that one, or something that even for our show that we could cover more deeply? Does anything rise to the top, or is it sort of like it's just all important? What are your thoughts?
I love that you asked that question, Derek, because we didn't talk a lot about it today, but nature-based solutions, I think there's going to be a lot there in the future. It's something that I've been really passionate about since I got into sustainability. Really, I got into this space through water and just loving to be on a boat on water or in water my entire life. And it's the reason I worked in food sustainability for over a decade. But I think nature-based solutions are going to unlock a lot of co-benefits and synergies of where we're looking at both environmental and social impacts together, and they're very sustainable. And they're easier to understand. They're not as complicated. So if there is one thing I would leave as a closing thought to continue to keep on our radar that will be a very interesting evolution in the next couple of years, I'd say nature-based solutions.
That's great. We'll put an episode together. Thank you for that. Where do our listeners go to learn more about the work you're doing, the work at WM, your journey individually? Where do you want to send people?
Yeah, I would love to learn more about like what we're doing on our journey around sustainability. For WM, we have a very easy website, sustainability.wm.com. That's our sustainability hub. We put all of our reporting out there and also fun stories. And that's all housed in one place. I'd also say anyone that wants to connect with me directly on LinkedIn, absolutely welcome it. I think there's a lot of power in the community that's being built for sustainability professionals. I've been doing this long enough. I can remember going to fairly large sustainability conferences at the time over a decade ago where a few hundred people was impressive to show up. And now we're getting a few thousand on a regular basis. So it's great to see the sustainability practitioner group grow so rapidly. It gives me a lot of inspiration.
100%. I was just out at Green Biz. We were just out at Green Biz, and it was packed. And, it's just so exciting to see so many people involved in this space from, some of the country's world's biggest brands, most influential brands. You've got NGOs, you've got service providers, you've got brands, you've got all different roles. So you're right. This is evolving. It's an exciting space. You gave us some great takeaways and advice. So thank you so much for taking the time for us today, and then enjoy the day out in Florida.
Thank you, Derek.
Yeah, thank you, Kristine. We'll talk to you soon. Hey, thanks for checking out our show today. This show was produced by the team at Think Parallax, a sustainability and communications agency with 2 decades of experience working with companies at every stage of the sustainability journey. We are experts at assessing where a company is today, defining a North Star, and developing a roadmap to get there. If your team needs sustainability guidance or training, or you have a recommendation for a guest or a topic on the show, visit us at thinkparallax.com. We'd love to hear from you.